Welcome back to the Holy Hardwood podcast with Pat and Tony, where your New Orleans Pelicans are sitting at 39 and 25 and fifth in the Western Conference. Pat, good to have you on here. It's been a couple weeks since we chatted. Your New Orleans Pelicans are 7-3 since post All Star break. Started off on a little bit of a slow start the first couple of games, but I think these last 4 or 5 games has kind of seen this team come into form a little bit with some players playing outside of their norms of what we were used to so far this year. Some to take note is Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram and Zion have upped their games a little bit, and you've seen contributions from some of the bench guys in various different ways in various different ball games, like Najee Marshall, Jose Alvarado, and Larry Nance Jr. So glad to have you back on, and interested to see what you've been thinking of the New Orleans Pelicans team since the last time we chatted.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back. Like you said, it's been a while. I know we had connected, just coming out of the All Star break, essentially, right? And we had detailed, what to expect and what we'd be looking for, and we had mentioned that we had anticipated that the first 10 or so games, would show us a lot, and we'd have a good idea of where the team sat and what the future, would behold based on those performances coming out of the break. And here we are, like you said, regrouping after a 7-3 stint coming out of the All Star break. You did a good job of highlighting the fact that they certainly did struggle a little bit out of the gate coming out of the All Star break, but they've done a really nice job of finding their rhythm here in the last couple games, and really seems to be that they've identified the way that they want to play. And although on different nights it's different guys here and there, they've done a good job of sticking to what seems to be their identity, and how they feel gives them the best opportunity to win on a night in, night out basis. So certainly, like you said, as of right now, as they sit fifth in the Western Conference, with a big schedule coming up here to start here shortly, especially with a home stint, right? I think that first 10 games did show us a lot, but I'm more excited to see the next 5 or 6 games, because I think you'll certainly see after the next 5 or 6, we'll have a very, very, very strong idea of who this team is going to be over the next month or so leading into the playoffs. And more importantly, as of now, I think that the next 5 or 6 will certainly cement them in whichever seed that they're going to end the season with.
I couldn't agree more with you, Pat. I mean that's kind of the thing. I always say we take it in 10 game increments. The 7-3 is great, and this team's to see seems to really be finding its rhythm, offensively and defensively. But just like we had a great road trip going 3-0, you could let go of the rope here and not be as focused in this home stand against a few better teams and competition. Um, you know, so it is ideal and big these next 5 to 10 games, like you're saying. Either one, they're going to cement themselves as being 4 or 5 seed, depending on what else happens. But at the end of the day, like I've always said, the Pelicans just have to worry about themselves and making sure they win. They can't really be looking in front of them or behind them on the other teams and what they're doing. And I think they've been really doing a good job, being winners of 4 straight. And hopefully, with Cleveland coming into town tomorrow night, they can, for the first time this season, win 5 games in a row. So that would be a huge thing. I think the Pelicans have gotten to this position a few times, 4, 5, 6 times this year, where they would get a 4 game winning streak and then they lose that fifth game. So I'd really like to see them get over the hump in that sense and get a really big win against the Cleveland Cavaliers team, who's pretty good. Dealing with some injuries as well, but you never know. Donovan Mitchell could be back, and then that sets them up for hopefully a huge game Friday night against the Clippers, who are ahead of them, and then on a back-to-back with Portland this week at home, right before they go on to another away streak for themselves.
Yeah, totally. Like you said, that Cleveland game is a big start to the homestand, but you got to make sure that, given the situation with some of those injuries, right, you don't start looking past Cleveland, and and start focusing on that Clipper game, right? That has a lot of implement um, implications essentially to the way that the seeding will shake out, right? Like both games obviously are very important, and if you had to pick one over the other, yes, that Clipper game probably is a little bit more crucial just due to the Western Conference nature of that matchup. But I think you know, the most impressive thing would to see that team come out and take care of business and have a level of maturity where they're not getting ahead of themselves and they are taking it game by game. So certainly a lot of great opportunities here in the next 3 or 4 games for our Pels, but I think the big thing that has been shown over the last 7 to 10 games, right, is that it seems like we've had some guys like you mentioned have certainly stepped up and have taken on bigger roles for themselves. But I think the most impressive thing is that you've seen 3 or 4 guys that have not only taken a step in terms of production and things of that nature, right, but we've really seen a lot of great versatility among those guys, right? Each and every one of those guys have done things outside of their norm that we've seen over the first 50 games or so that we've always suspected they had the ability to do. And I think it just took this late into the year, whether it was physical limitations for a guy like Trey Murphy and catching his rhythm, or guys like Zion and Brandon just finding the most efficient way for them to play together. But when talking about those three and then looping in a guy like Herb Jones, right? They've all taken their game to another level, and most importantly for me, I think this is by far the best we've ever seen Zion and Brandon play together, and it might not seem that way, right? If you're just catching a game or really haven't been following that duo all along, because it's not super flashy plays or anything of that nature that they're running 2-man game, and yeah, it's clear that these guys are playing great off of one another. It's the small simple things that they're doing for one another when they're playing, right? They're finding ways to get each other space. They're finding each other in their hot zones. When they're playing in transition, they're both doing a number of things, right, to help the other guy, get downhill and get to their spots and ultimately get to the free throw line or whatever that may be. So just seeing those guys continue to improve on a night in, night out basis to the point where it doesn't feel like they're having to force the fact that they're having to play well together, right? Like in the past, they've had big games and they've played well together, but it felt like they were having to make a conscious effort to play that certain style and to make it work for each and um, every one of them. Where now it just seems like it's in the flow of the offense. Each one of them knows where the other one's going to be at a specific time, and they do those simple, small things that just lead to easier buckets, whether it's for them or their teammates. And so for me, the maturation process of those two, and the way that they've approached, this portion of the season, right? I think a lot could be said um, for both of them, right? When you look at the beginning of that stint of schedule just following the All Star breaks, whether it was Brandon, battling the dings and minor injuries, whether it's the rolled ankle or things of that nature, and he got back out there just as fast as he possibly could and didn't miss any time and was ready to go ahead and go the next night, or those guys getting in super late on that back to back against Indiana, where they typically could have sat those guys and used it as a rest opportunity and mailed it in. You saw both of those guys, and you had heard some communication from behind the scenes that they understood the importance of those games and took it upon themselves to be the leaders of the team and ensure that they were in the lineup and gave their team the best opportunity to win. So for me, those two as a unit, obviously in combination with their own individual performance, have been the most promising and most impressive thing that I've seen. But that certainly isn't a slight to a guy like Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, who, like you said, for the most part over this last 10 games have really stepped up and have really played at a high level.
Yeah, and I think the biggest, word you kind of use during that whole thing, which is, I don't know, it's just like a flow. Their flow is better, and at the end of the day, I think both of these guys have really put their own individual stats and like accolades above like the team and winning and success. Because at the end of the day, they've always said that they care about winning. Like Do I wish, Zion or Brandon are averaging, 24, 25 a night? Yes, I think that's really good for them. That means they're aggressive, so on and so forth. But they've taken it upon themselves to, you know, average 3 or 4 less points per game and play that style like you're saying of, "Hey, some nights it's not gonna be me, sometimes it's gonna be this person," and that's what's leading to wins because essentially you're seeing 1 through 9 or 10 that this team is way more balanced, and that's what's causing all of this fluctuation in the stats. And at the end of the day, if you're winning, you're winning. Um, I know those guys are going to be there for the playoff run and big games, and I know what their abilities and what they can do. It's kind of the sense of like what I saw during the road trip is I thought it was really crucial that the other guys, granted, these teams were a little banged up and didn't have their best units out there, but I felt like it was a big, week and a half that Trey Murphy got on a roll. Herb Jones saw some stuff go through. Same thing with like Najee and uh, Jose. So like it's those feel good games that Brandon the last time out he was fine having 7 points, 7 rebounds, and 10 assists, and they win by however much they won by. And like I said, when the big moments come, I know those guys are going to be there. But I really thought it was really crucial for this team to go on this winning streak, win these games on the road, and then you know implore these other guys to have a bigger role whenever these games might not have been so big with the talent on the other end being less. So to see Trey Murphy have a couple games where he was in the 20s and all these other guys stepping up off the bench. It's just something great to see. I'm more focused about Zion and Brandon in these, this week coming up in these bigger games, and then on this next road trip where you're going down south and playing the Orlando's and the Miami Heat and so on and so forth. So really can't say anything else besides that. Like you said, I think the leadership from Zion and Brandon has definitely upped over the last month or so. You were saying about Brandon's injuries, and behind the scenes, you heard Brandon basically say when he rolled his ankle, he's like, "I couldn't leave Z out there alone by himself because we were dealing with injuries that night." Second night of the back to back coming in late. Those guys wanted to go out there and improve something and try to win a game. Granted, they got down 20 early, but then fought back and kept cutting the lead. And ever since then, they've gone on this winning streak. And I just hope they can continue this. They had a nice day off Monday. Good practice today, and hopefully going forward in this home stretch, this solidifies them, like you're saying, going forward uh, for that playoff race of being that 5 seed.
Yeah. What aspect of Zion and Brandon's game have you been, I guess it would be, the most pleasantly surprised with coming out of the All-Star break? Is there anything about each of their games that you've seen that has shifted, or anything that you think is noteworthy and that has, shown you maybe a different ceiling for this group?
Yeah, I mean, I think I briefly touched on it, here and there about just the aggressiveness. This might not necessarily be just throughout these whole games since All Star break, but I think you really saw Brandon come out whenever he was first coming out of the gates here. He had a 22 point per game, 24, 28, 30, like whatever it was. But I saw the aggressiveness. He was getting more downhill. He was getting more opportunities at the free throw line from where normally his first 50 games, he was shooting about 4.5 per game, where he's now upticked to, 8.5. Zion, I think he's just letting it come to him. I mean, there's certain times where we're going to get him in positions where he's going downhill, but he believes in his teammates that they're going to hit the shots like Trey Murphy. You know, we've said he's gone through a cold streak, but he's really hit his stride now, and I think that these guys' leadership, like I said, it's their trust in their other parts around them, and then they both know like I'm going to get to my spot and I'm going to score. And I think that's been the biggest difference from these guys is yes, night to night. it might be a different person, but I think everyone's in tandem offensively and defensively now, knowing that each possession is more crucial than the next. And I think that's where we've seen this team, jump up a level in.
Yeah. No, I definitely don't disagree with any of that. And I think a lot of it that you stem from is just, kind of more mentality, and certainly, aspect of that I definitely agree with. For me, I mean, taking a look at Brandon first, right? Like, we've seen him, like you mentioned, have a different approach offensively, more so what we've seen from him towards the later stages of this year. And the more and more that I see it, a lot of it, I've just come to believe that, although, like we've mentioned, not ideal, I think you get one version of Brandon in the first half of the year that where he's really focused on taking care of himself and making sure he's trying to stay in the best position he can physically, right, so that he's able to perform at a high level later in the year. And then he kind of sees that All Star break as a kickstart to really the start of the postseason, and then you really see him take his game to another level, or I guess at least just start to expend more energy, right? So obviously that's something that we've expected, and that's followed that same course. So not really surprised there. But for me, when looking at Brandon, right, he's only continued to be a great playmaker for this team, and has been a not just a offensive player for this team, but he's been a offensive cog for this team, right? They are playing through him at times when Zion's not on the floor. It's not the best matchup, and he's generating good shots for other guys. But on top of that, I think his defensive intensity and attention to detail has taken another step that we really haven't seen, right? Like, especially over the last 4 or 5 games, he's been phenomenal defensively, right? I mean, he's done a solid job on ball, which would always be, out of the two areas, that'll be an area that he struggles with more than, being an off-ball defender, just because, he is incredibly tall and lanky, and he probably doesn't move in space as well as a guy like Herb Jones, who's 6'5", 6'6", and that's just how he's built. But as an off-ball defender and a weak side defender and jumping passing lanes and being the low man on rotations to provide some rim protection, like, I think he's been absolutely phenomenal. And I think that bodes incredibly well for this team, because I think over the last, 5, 6, 7 games, you've really seen this defense really um, get a lot better. And it really just feels like they really are on a string, and they're playing together, and they're in the right spots, and they're not giving up as many free and easy looks a night, right, that then they have to make up for on the other end. So, I think you got to give credit where credit's due for Brandon's, focus and attention to detail on the defensive end. And then looking at a guy like Zion, right? He's really done what I've asked him coming out of the break, right? He feels like he's tiptoeing on that area where, it feels like he's getting back to where it's like, okay, well, if you get him the ball in space, like, it's dead. It's either a bucket, a free throw, or it's a wide open three. Like, one of those three things are bound to happen. And that obviously adds a tremendous wrinkle to this team, just so they don't have to work so hard every single possession on the offensive side of the floor, especially as you start getting into these series, right, where that can really start being the difference between you advancing or not advancing. But most importantly for Zion, it's his mentality was getting to the rim and not being stopped by anybody, and it's his explosiveness, his athleticism, his desire to affect the game on both ends of the floors where he can, right? Like, it's not as if he needs to be a lockdown defender, but he's giving you 1 to 2 plays a night where he saves you a bucket, where he flashes that athleticism and comes from the weak side and throws a shot into the fourth row. And yeah, it might only be 2 to 4 points that he's saving, but the impact that has on the rest of his team as defenders, the way that they're seeing him exude that energy and knowing they have him back there to protect him, and him really raising the ceiling for this team. Because, I mean, prior to this, right, when he was not able to perform at the same level athletically, it felt like this team had a certain ceiling just because of that. But now, I mean, he's one of the best athletes again in the league, and he's really doing stuff on a night in, night out basis. It's just not many other guys in the world could do. And I think just from that sheer point alone, right, I feel like this team's ceiling has raised in the last 2 to 3 weeks.
from my perspective as well, it's like I always had the hope, like going into it, like when it's going right, when they're healthy, hopefully these guys are who they are. Like it comes down to a thing where you have to pick your poison in a sense. And some people are like, oh well, we'll take the Pelicans. I'm like, I would not want to see this team, especially red hot, if they can keep this up and stay healthy. Like, I think they're finally hitting the point where they're getting comfortable with each other. This team is on a string collectively, 1 through 15. Everyone loves and enjoys being around each other. There's an energy. And, that stuff goes a long way. Like, you make the comments at the deadline, like, why don't you make moves? And this is like the third or fourth year with this same collective group of guys, and I think everybody's kind of put the ego aside and just said, "Hey, like we're trying to do big things here in New Orleans, and at the end of the day, we just want to win. And however that's done, like it might be different and night to night, but we're gonna go in and try to get wins." Like I think their main goal now is, hey, let's stay at this fifth seed, try to work our way up, and get 50 wins or more. Like that is what's on their mind. It's not just happy enough to okay, we're gonna just try to stay out of the play in. It's like you put a couple good more weeks together, and you're looking at a whole different dynamic for this team potentially seating wise, maybe home court. Granted, we've played a little better on the road, but I think in the playoffs, it's gonna be huge to have that home crowd for you.
Yeah. I mean, assuming the way things are trending now, who would you rather face in a round one series, Minnesota or the Clippers?
I mean, honestly, I'm fine with either of them. I mean, I think if you go, tick for tack, like, I just like the Minnesota matchup. I mean, you roll them in and Carl Towns maybe coming off of injury, coming back, like, it's always hard throwing a guy back into the lineup like that. I don't know. I just like our guys against their guys. I even like our guys against the Clippers.
Yeah.
It's just I think either matchup is going to be a tough, long, hard fought series. But at the end of the day, like I wouldn't be surprised we if the Pelicans came in and shocked somebody round one, like 4-2, 4-1. They just got hot and just said, "Hey, like we have more guys than you. We're on a different level right now." But that's better said than done. Like it could go the total opposite way as well. But I think either way, it's an intriguing matchup for both teams and how you would, defend each other and what the adjustments would be. But what do you think about those two?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly I don't disagree with any of that. I think both are really, when looking up and down the Western Conference, I mean, it's really set up for the Pels' success, right? Like if understanding that now that where they've gotten and they're kind of jockeying at that 4, 5, 6 position with a real chance to stay in five or even pole vault up into four if they continue hot and maybe some other things go their way. I mean, that's really who you would want to be sitting there, Minnesota or the Clippers, just based on your roster construction and just the success that you've had, over the last year and a half against those teams. You, like you said, you really like your chances there. Um, so I think that's great, right? I mean, for me personally, I would have a hard time not seeing them as the favorite in those, just due to the fact that I don't know, especially coming off of that Carl Towns injury, even if he was healthy, I don't know how much I believe in that group when it comes to playoff basketball. Obviously, Ant's another worldly talent, is a fantastic player, but I've seen Rudy get played off the floor in those playoff games, and that's a crucial role. I mean, he's their second or third player, right? Best player. That's different than us losing JV off the floor, who's our fourth or fifth or sixth best player at a time, right? Like them losing Rudy is a big deal, and then obviously you have to wonder what the status of Cat is, and then you look at the Clippers who've had their issues in the postseason, and a guy like Paul George has had his ups and downs, and they haven't played a lot of postseason basketball together. So I mean, it's two really good opportunities, and it'll shake out how it shakes out, and then you just deal with it there. But I mean, it's finding its way into the you're peaking at the right time. You're getting the matchups that you'd like to have, right? It's different than having, a Phoenix sitting there that you have to go toe to toe with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, right? Or the Lakers who have had our numbers. So like things are finding a way of really starting to head in the Pels direction. And like you said, it's now just about keeping their foot down, putting themselves in the best position that they can. And then it's like at that point, right? Anything can truly happen because even looking at the top side of the Western Conference, I don't know how sold I am. Like, depending on who gets in on the backside of the play in or what that looks like. I mean, you could have a very, very favorable second round matchup as well, and things go your way. And maybe you find your way going deep into a second round or getting some Western Conference Finals experience. But I mean, you really couldn't ask for a better situation to be unfolding, in front of this team. And so, like we've said, that door opens a lot of times earlier than you would expect, and it also closes earlier than you expect. So, I think as you've got everything the way that it is now, right? Like I think you really got to make that push and see what you can do because the stars are starting to align a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just exciting to talk about these things this late in the season, just because it's not something that the Pels have been accustomed to. We saw a brief little stint, 2 years ago in that exciting matchup when we played our way in and fought Phoenix tough, and that was pretty wild. But you know, I think the expectations are high, and it's first, check off. Let's not get into that play in. Like I said, still 18 games left. I mean, just by the way the things are, you seem to at least maybe being in that 5 to 6 range. Hopefully, like I said, things could change quickly. You have a bad week here or there. Other teams do well. It is what it is. But you know, you look down the line, like you're saying, and you're seeing the Denvers and the OKCs that are in front of you possibly for that second round matchup. And again, playoffs is all about matchups and how people are and health and wellness and all that stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised if we lost in the first round. Wouldn't be surprised if we got to the Western Conference Finals. I think a lot of people would be surprised, but at the end of the day, you look at the talent on this team. Like if you get hot, I would be like, okay, like maybe didn't expect this, but I wouldn't be so surprised to be like, there was no way, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's pretty much just everything that I had to say. It's not a typical year, and the team is trending in the right direction at the right time, and there isn't a team that's sitting there above them. And obviously, things can change, right? Obviously, those teams above them can get beat in the first round, and maybe you get a Lakers who are clicking, and that's always scary, or a Phoenix, and so anything's possible. But there isn't there isn't that one team, outside of just the Nuggets based on their success and they're coming off the title, and obviously Jokic is another worldly player, but there isn't a team or a group of guys that you feel like if you get there and you're healthy that you can't compete with them, right? Like that doesn't seem like that's sitting there in the Western Conference when I look out and start to look ahead of what could potentially be in the future. But you got to get yourself there and you got to put yourself in a position to do that. So obviously the last 10 games have been huge. I think the next 5 or 6 games are going to be massive as well. And I think, like we've said, right, there's going to be a lot of information coming out of these next 5 or 6, and we're really going to have an idea what is plausible and what is a realistic, outcome for this team. So, certainly super excited to see these next 6 games as we're getting closer and closer to the postseason. An opportunity that we haven't quite had a chance to see as a Pelicans fan. So, hopefully this team can hold on, can continue to play the right way, and keep setting themselves up for success. And then here in a couple weeks, right, we'll be gearing up for the playoff run, and then at that point, right, it's a blank slate. Everybody's 0-0. We're gonna jump the ball up and see who comes out of it when everything shakes itself out. So certainly excited for that, and really excited for what the future beholds.
No doubt about it, Pat. It's an energy for me. It's something that I think this city, this fan base, this team, these guys who have been working their tails off for the last couple years, they had that slight success. And I think ever since that and the disappointment from the end of last year has been eating at these guys alive. There's different things that if it's Brandon or Zion, CJ, the whole list of guys that they have to prove, and I think they're ready for this moment. And we're saying, these next couple of weeks are vital. And at the end of the day, it's some exciting brand of basketball for a city that deserves it and who's been riding with this team for years and years and years. And hopefully, it's a successful one. And you know, we just keep on keeping on. But it all starts tomorrow at home against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then you got two more on the home stand, and hopefully you've taken care of your business to set yourself even better going into the road stand again, where I said the Pels are going to be heading down south to play the Florida teams, so that'll be interesting, especially after the last time we faced off against Miami. But they got to take it game by game, and it's been exciting to watch so far, and excited to see what comes next.
Yep, certainly exciting times. And with that, this has been the Holy Hardwood Podcast with Pat and Tony. Talk soon.